All right, so we're going to get started, everybody. So before we get started, for those of you who might need Spanish translation, you will see the phone number in the chat, but I'm also going to ask Lorna to explain how to do it in Spanish. Oh, Lorna's muted. Okay.
A las personas que hablan español pueden llamar al 551-241-6310. De nuevo, 551-241-6310. No se necesita código de acceso. Gracias.
Thank you, Lorna. For those of you who've never been to one of our SDP Connects, welcome. My name is Judy Mark. I am the president of Disability Voices United and the parent of a person who is in the self-determination program at Westside Regional Center. Disability Voices United, in case you don't know, because I see some new names, is an organization directed by and for people with disabilities and their family members. So today, we are really excited to have a guest presenter. I'm excited because that means I don't have to present. His name is Chris Wecks, and Chris is an independent facilitator in Northern California, but also is an advocate for special education students as well in their IEPs. And he has brought together the issue of self-determination and education for us. Before I have Chris get started, I just want to mention something. We are going to let Chris present. He has really incredible slides, and I'd like him to finish his presentation first. Oh, we're going to actually mute everybody. Go ahead and mute everyone, and then I'll unmute myself. All right, so everybody is muted right now, but you are powerful enough. You have the power to unmute yourself at any time, but please only unmute yourself during the times that we are actually asking you to speak, so that it's easier for our Spanish interpreter to speak, to hear, sorry, and for all of us to hear. So I would like Chris to make his presentation, and then you all can ask questions in person by raising your hand, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You can also put your questions in the chat. I just want to warn you though that if you put your question in the chat, there's a chance I'm going to lose it because there's a lot of activity in the chat. So if it's possible for you to ask it using your voice, that would be great. If not, I understand, and I will go through the chat as much as I can. The way you do raise your hand so that you can ask a question is by clicking on participants at the bottom of your screen, and then you'll find the option to raise hand. And then that keeps the order of people who are having their hands raised, and I'll call on you in the order in which you raised your hand. The final thing is something I can't remember. Oh, we are recording this. I want to tell everybody we are recording this, and we will place the recording on our website that gives you tons of information about self-determination, and that is called theinterchange.org, theinterchange.org. In the Interchange, you can find tons of information about the self-determination program. You can find a forum where you can ask questions, get advice. Who's your recommendation of a good independent facilitator? Who's your recommendation of somebody to be a personal trainer? All of these things you can get through theinterchange.org. In there is also all of our SDP Connect webinars from the very beginning. So there are weeks and weeks of these videos. So if, let's say, you're interested in the person-centered plan or how to change your individual budget amount, all of those we have done before. We may in fact do them again, but you can go back and listen in and learn from that. Okay, so I'm trying to think if I forgot any of the housekeeping issues before we start our presentation. So once again, please stay muted. If you need the Spanish translation, there is a specific phone number that you can find in the chat. And to ask questions, you need to use the raise hand feature. All right, so right now I'd like to introduce Chris Wecks. Chris is an independent facilitator in the Bay Area. And he is going to present on how the self-determination program can support students in their education. So go ahead, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. You go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Let me just wave and say hello, because most of the time you're going to be looking at a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to connect with all of you face-to-face first. So I'm going to put up this presentation now that you can look at. This is a little new for me. I usually do, I tell people I'm more of a ground warrior. The work I do is with clients more directly, and I don't do a lot of the speaking gigs like this. But I'm a big fan of SDP Connect and Disability Voices, so I wanted to try and provide something that would be helpful. So yeah, this topic is about self-determined education and how the two relate to one another. I'm going to guess a lot of people on this call have some sense of the relationship between the two already. This is kind of an introduction, so some of this may be preliminary, but I'm going to try and keep the presentation reasonably brief so that we have a lot of time to talk about some of the questions that you might have. So, just really quick, I don't know how you feel, but here in the Bay Area, I was telling Judy, I was staring out the window all day today at the smoke and the clouds, and it made the noon sky look like twilight. I was just thinking about how alien and kind of Martian a place I'm feeling like I'm in right now. And, I put this in my imagination. I have sort of this bizarre view outside, and I think about the fires outside, and I put that in sort of the same emotional bucket that I put the pandemic and the fears associated with that, and going outside and going grocery shopping, letting my recently adopted children visit their nana and papa. It's just, there's a lot of fear there. You put that in the same bucket as this insane upcoming election and the fear and passion around that. You put that in the same bucket as the anger and the fear as we ask ourselves hard questions amid protests and some of the sad clashes we've seen as we reckon with kind of an architecture of prejudice in our criminal justice and police systems. I put all that together, and I mean, it's a lot. Am I right? Like, it's a lot. So, I mean, I'm saying this as an introduction. You are going through a lot. I'm going through a lot. I'm the parent of a developmentally disabled child. And so I just, don't be fooled. Nobody here is going through this without feeling, very vulnerable, very raw, sometimes very confused about some of these topics, like the one we're going to talk about. I'm the parent of a child who had a brain tumor as an infant. And I've been constantly struggling with her IEP, and she's a bit of a square peg trying to fit in the round holes of the services around us, and trying to find the right fit for service providers. And I've been doing that for 10 years now. So it's hard for me, it's hard for you. And it can feel really overwhelming. And so I just wanted to say, I hope today that you learned something, but I also hope that you remember just to kind of be kind to yourself and just, put an arm around yourself today. I hope you can stop and focus on your immediate experience and breathe and, find that gratefulness for what exists in your immediate experience, and appreciate those around you and give them a kiss. And, and so I hope that you have that in your day as well today. So I've certainly been rethinking about how I need to sort of get the help I need and spread out Abound services, which is the organization I'm a part of. And we provide independent facilitation and generic services advocacy, including special education advocacy. So like I said, I don't do a lot of these talks. I'm more of a ground warrior. I consider myself a fierce advocate for my clients, and so what I'm going to talk to you about is how you can do that for yourselves or your children or your family members in the education system. The main 3 points here that you can see, I want you to take away, that education and special education, these are a generic service, which is a very important term you've probably heard on here before. It means that the services that education and special education offer, they have to be utilized before Lanterman Act funds can be used, as in self-determination funds. And even if you're not in self-determination, regional center funds can be used. You have to utilize education and special education services that are offered first. Second point I wanted to bring up today is that how a service or a support is defined by you and by other people in the room, it may determine if it can be used in conjunction with school, or if your regional center caseworker will tell you that that is not a service that they can cover, that that's covered by someone else. And that can really come down to just how you utilize and articulate language around what it is that you're seeking. And then the third thing is I just wanted to bring up a few creative uses of Lanterman funds to help support education, where if education is what we're focused on, we talk about the things in the peripheral, and how Lanterman funds can support education in that way. So let's see if I do this right. Okay, so I've provided this just to be basic, in case folks are new to some terminology. Just a couple of things here. It's important to know the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP. They're covered by different laws. IEPs are very expansive and are generally what we talk about when we talk about special education, but you or your child may not have an IEP. If you're outside of the K-12 system, you won't have an IEP. You'll have a 504 plan potentially. Inside the K-12 system, you can also not potentially have an IEP. You may have a 504 plan. The sort of rough cut way to think about the difference between a 504 plan and special education is that special education provides a change in the educational environment, and it's often thought about in terms of money. So a 504 plan is more, it's considered a plan that allows a student to have access to the existing educational environment, and often involves simply removing the barriers to their access. On the regional center side, service codes, very important term. At regional center, all supports and services are categorized according to a standard list of service codes. Lanterman Act funds, kind of brought up already, funds used by regional centers and regional center clients to pay for supports and services. And then a generic resource, of which special education would be one. It's a freely accessible resource for a given individual. Okay, so that's the boring stuff. And there are many more terms. I'm not getting too dense in that because I didn't want to make everyone fall asleep, but if you imagine an individual and their universe of support needs. So you have a developmentally disabled individual who's in the regional center and is now in self-determination, or maybe in the near future is in self-determination. You can, let's say in the person-centered planning process, identify a number of support and service needs that individual wants. Now, if no other service agencies existed out there, then all of that would be covered by the Lanterman Act, right? But the Lanterman Act says that they are the payer of last resort. So the concept to keep in mind is that education and special education take a chunk of that. IHSS, if you're familiar with that service agency, they might take a chunk of that. Medi-Cal might take a chunk of that. And so what you see is that the range of those support needs that an individual has begin to be taken up by these other service agencies. And the point is that you're not allowed to use Lanterman Act funds self-determination funds or regional center services if they fall, if the service need in question, what you're seeking, falls in one of these other buckets. So I'm going to give you some examples. So we have educational services. We have 504 plan services, I'll briefly touch on, special education services, and then self-determination funds, and some things that are related to education that you might consider spending self-determination dollars on or advocating for self-determination dollars for in your individual budget. So, so you would not succeed if you were to go to your regional center caseworker and say, I don't like my curriculum or my child's curriculum. They access the general education curriculum, but I don't like their math program. I would like the regional center to pay for a different curriculum. If that's the entirety of your message, that would not work. And that's because curriculum, unless you're able to specifically identify a need particular to your student that is different than other students, is already covered under educational services. Other services that education covers: after school-based programs, K-12 free and reduced lunch if they qualify. And then I'll mention the 504 plan here, access to these other educational resources. If they have trouble getting to class on time because they use a walker, a 504 plan would grant them, an exemption from tardiness so that they can get to class on time. A 504 plan basically removes the barriers to the general educational services curriculum. So unless you have something exceptional, an exceptional case to be made, things that fall in, again, that educational services bucket would not be covered if you went to your regional center caseworker and said, I'd like for the regional center to cover this, or I'd like my self-determination fund to pay for that. Similarly, special education services, which would be, as I put, any augmentation to provide an equitable education to a student with a disability. So academic speech therapy, you couldn't go to your regional center and say, I want you to pay for academic speech therapy. The regional center would say, I'm sorry, that is covered by special ed services. You would need to go to your special ed director, your program manager, your local area, and ask for that from them in the context of an IEP. You would not be able to ask your regional center caseworker or have in your self-determination plan payment for a behavior plan and support in the school system. This also would be something that is a hindrance to typical education services, and so special ed would be required to be pursued to pay for that. Similarly, special ed would be responsible among people seeking this for individualized direction or instruction, such as a one-to-one aide in the classroom or a specialized tutor during a free period. So individualized instruction, a one-to-one aide, a tutor, things of this nature, if they are identified as an educational need due to the student's disability, ought to be covered under special education. So these are things that are typically covered in these buckets and therefore would not be permitted to be covered in a self-determination fund. Or again, I'm talking to a lot of people here. I don't know how many of you are in self-determination yet. Asking your service coordinator for that to be covered as a purchase of service, as a typical traditional regional service offer. Okay, so if these are the sorts of things that can't be covered, what are some of the things that can be covered? Well, you could, and we'll go into more details in the next couple of slides, but a couple of examples here: support for accessing after-school activities in the community. So this would not be a school-based after-school program. This would be a community-based after-school program. Even if the community-based program had material or had material, sorry, someone chimed in, but had material that was academic in nature, if it was a community-based program, this is something that you could seek support for out of your self-determination funds or from your regional center case worker. And then another example, and this is particular to students who have graduated out of or outside of the K-12 system, the sorts of modified supports that exist under the law IDEA, which allows you to have special education services or an IEP, modified supports when you're going to college or if you're in a trade program. These suddenly become something that the Lanterman Act does cover, assuming that the Department of Rehab or the existing college disability services department doesn't cover the need. So you can begin to think of special ed services at college in a way that you weren't necessarily able to in the K-12 system as something that the self-determination program can cover. So I'm going to move on. Okay, so I just wanted to make a quick point about this. I've drawn some kind of hard distinctions about what is and isn't covered, but how you define the service that you are seeking will really determine what department, what agency, what service agency covers it. So here's a question for you. Your child is in your child or you are in a yoga-based program. And the question is, do you call this a supplemental or adaptive PE program? Do you call it physical therapy? Or do you call it a specialized and unique form of physical therapy? The way that you define that particular program is going to define who everyone believes needs to cover it. If you call it adaptive PE or supplemental PE, your regional center is going to say, well, that is something that special ed needs to cover. If you call it standard physical therapy, your regional center is going to say, well, if this is standard physical therapy, you're going to need to go through your medical program to make sure that comparable physical therapy providers aren't already covered. If, on the other hand, you're able to identify reasons why you or your child need a specialized form of physical therapy that sits outside of network in terms of your medical plan, and isn't something that would fall under special ed services, you may begin to formulate a case for why you can both receive it in your individual budget and be able to spend out of your self-determination funds. So it's a question to ask yourself, is how you articulate each of the services that you or your child are looking to have in your self-determination fund, paid out of your self-determination fund. If you define it a certain way, you're going to get the kind of pushback that I've just described. On the other hand, if what you need truly is simply adaptive PE, someone once told me, why would you want to waste self-determination dollars if all you need is exactly what special education has to offer? Of course, put it in that bucket. So I'm not saying let's start creatively defining everything, but I am saying if you are trying to advocate for a particular service like this, how you articulate how it's defined is really going to matter. And a lot of what I do with my clients is make sure that in the universe of their support needs, we're articulating what those support needs are so that they match up with at least one of these major buckets in their lives so that someone can cover it. Otherwise, you come to a circumstance where you find yourself unfunded for a particular service or support. And that's really unfortunate that when that happens. So a big part of what I do is advocate both on the budget certification side and on the spending plan side, that everything is covered by one of these major circles here. So, okay, so I was asked to mention this, that, IDEA, the law that that guides the special education process and entitles individuals to an IEP process, it ends after the K-12 program ends. So after high school, it's a whole different ballgame, and it's important to think about that. 504 plan still applies. So being able to access classrooms, preferred seating, accommodations for being late, increased test time, increased anything. Again, you can reasonably advocate for a lot of things if it doesn't cost a lot of money. It was sort of a rule of thumb. But 504 plans still do apply if you're in a trade program or if you're going to college. The Department of Rehabilitation begins to apply a bit more, especially if you're in a particular trade program. So you're going to find a regional center asking you questions if you or your child are in a trade program as to whether or not you've exercised the trade program the Department of Rehab offerings. And then lots of colleges do have college-specific disability services that exceed what a 504 plan would provide. And those those services would be considered a generic resource. They're freely accessible services. So you would need to make sure that you've explored the range of options that your particular college or trade program offers in the way of college-specific, trades program-specific disability services, and made sure that those don't provide what it is that you're seeking in terms of increased access and increased support and services in the classroom. And then, so the bottom line, though, is that apart from these things, where special ed disappears, medical and Lanterman funds can be applied. So things like tutoring no longer fall under special education. Those are things you can begin to consider as part of your self-determination spending and your budgeting, as well as aides that can, let's say, help you to and from class, folks who can take notes for you, transportation services, all the services that you would normally receive in a special education setting, you can potentially advocate for out of your self-determination budget. So after high school, things change a bit, and I'm sure we'll have questions about that. Okay, so these are some principles I've kind of laid out. I'd like all of you to think about some of these questions. So if you or your child needs one of these things, the question is, who would be responsible for them? And I'm going to go through them because you'll notice that the inset ones are modified variations of the outset ones. So, for example, a K-12, in a K-12 program, either you or your child need a one-to-one school assistance in a specific subject. Can you think of who would be responsible for paying for that? And hopefully that's an easy one. A one-to-one assistant of some sort for you or your child would be a special ed specific item. So special ed would be responsible for that. But if you were seeking a similar one-to-one aid and you articulated it as someone who provided assistance for enrichment in a community activity near the school or around the school or in the school in some way, that one-to-one aid suddenly would become something that the regional center would cover. That would not be a special education specific item. So you could argue for that second one out of your self-determination funds or from your regional center caseworker to cover as a POS. Okay, you're in a trade program, transport, transport from apartment to class. Okay, now, so if you're in a community where there's no public, freely accessible community transit, and that does exist, obviously, then you could argue for any form of transport that can get you from A to B, as long as it's available in your area, and have the regional center pay for it. But in many communities, if you're in a trade program, transport from your apartment to the class would probably fall under one of the other generic services in your community, be it paratransit or a discounted bus system or something of that sort. However, if you were to argue that the transportation you needed required a sensory-friendly private transport of some sort, then you would begin to formulate a case that the existing supports and services in your community that are freely accessible no longer meet your needs, that the way that you've articulated this particular support is such that you can argue that that belongs both in your individual budget and be able to be paid for out of your spending plan. Okay? Okay, so K-12 sound amplification or sound isolation. If you've ever heard the sound of 20 chairs screeching across a floor, you'll know what I mean. For some of our sound sensitive kids, that's really challenging. Or sound amplification, if you or your child have a hearing loss, providing an FM system or sound field of some sort, this would all fall under special education. So you would have to argue for that within the special education setting, and that's fine. However, if you were arguing and you needed an FM system to be used in the community and at school, suddenly you would be in a position where you begin exploring other options. And in this case, you'd look at your medical option, if that could be covered. But then after that, you could ask the regional center or use your self-determination funds to cover that. Okay, last one, assistance navigating to a college class. Depending on what the assistance was, this might fall under a 504 plan or a college disability services program, a number of different service options you'd have to explore, generic service options you'd have to explore. But if you more specifically identified a need for costs related to a guide dog for navigating your community, including at school, of course, suddenly you would be advocating for a service that no other agency would provide for. And so you could begin to make the case that that's something that should belong in your budget and something that you could spend out of your self-determination fund. Okay, I hope that wasn't boring. I hope that was interesting. But so the point is how you articulate these things. They can begin to support your educational environment. That's the basics of the presentation here. I go through this all the time with my clients. I work as many of my clients' special education advocate on top of being their independent facilitator, and I usually fold those into my service fees. If you have any questions after this that I didn't cover and that we can't cover in the Q&A today, there's my email address. Our team is now in the San Francisco Bay, in the larger Sacramento area, and now in the Orange County and LA area, actually. So if you are in those areas and you'd like some help discussing these in further detail, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Chris. That was amazing. Just great. I want to add one more thing that people can, I want to make a couple of clarifications as well. You are not allowed to pay for tuition for school. Even in the college level, you cannot use self-determination funds to pay for tuition. Certainly you can't do it at K through 12. However, you can pay tuition for class that can help you achieve your GED. What does that stand for? General education degree? Is that what that stands? I don't even know what that stands for. Anyway, I've just heard GED. This is when a person has not received their high school diploma, they can take a GED test, which allows them to receive their diploma. You can spend your self-determination funds on that. It's on a class to help you get your GED. That is actually written very specifically in the waiver, the list of services that have been approved by the federal government. And I should also say that you can actually pay for some tuition of some kinds of classes. So I shouldn't say no tuition. I should say you can't be paying tuition towards a college degree. However, if you want to take an art class at a community college, you can pay tuition for that. If you want to take a dance class, any kind of social recreational type of class, it will pay for that, but it will not be able to pay for your college, your general college tuition toward receiving a degree.
You'd have to argue for it to be a part of a sort of a community activity, rather than it being a part of your ostensible career path.
Right.
So that your community college, it's not a blanket for community colleges, but like if you're an English major and you want to take an art class for fun at a community college, that would be an example where he's like, I'm just doing a community activity, so you can cover that.
Yeah, it's under community integration services, which is very different than under educational services, where it very specifically prohibits it.
Jan says, so an enrichment class. Yeah,
Right.
That would be a real good way to think about it. Yeah.
So if anybody wants to ask Chris or anyone else a question or offer some guidance as well, what you should do is to go down to participants on the bottom of your screen and click on raise hand. For those of you who are on the Spanish line, I'm going to offer an opportunity for you to ask a question in Spanish through our interpreter as well. If you are listening in on the computer in English and not on the Spanish line, but would like to ask a question in Spanish, that is also fine. And we can use an interpreter. We will have an interpreter for that. So for now, I see Carla Lehman. Go ahead, Carla, and mute yourself.
Hi. That was really good, the presentation. I wanted to say something. I have a client that recently entered self-determination, and she was able to use their funding to get a new computer and a big monitor to use for therapy at home, but also was able to use it with school, which is great because everything now is virtually. So that's another thing that we can think about using it. And also to pay for internet, because the free internet is not good. And so she was not getting any access. She was not able to get access for any therapist or anything. So now she can do a therapist like behavioral therapy, but also access school. So kind of like double whammy there.
And Carla, how did you help advocate for that computer? What language did you use to help advocate for that computer?
Well, in reality, like she wasn't able to access ABA therapy, for example, or social skills or anything that the regional center was covering or any other therapies.
Okay, good.
That's how.
But incidentally, sorry to interrupt. Incidentally, it did help with their participation in education too.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
That's excellent. And I hope everyone hears that how you articulate the need for that particular item, even though it incidentally helps with education, was the effective language used to both make that person's educational life better, as well as provide them with additional support in terms of ABA therapy and the other sort of digital access that they needed with other types of services. That's fantastic. Well done, Carla.
Thank you. And I have a question.
Okay, so hold on real quick. While you're on the computer thing, I just want to also mention that the very first participant in the self-determination pilot program 21 years ago, Maria Marquez, the first thing that she purchased with her self-determination dollars was a computer. And the reason she did that was because she was an adult and she hadn't been able to get a job because she didn't know how to use a computer. And the only way to learn how to use a computer for her was to have one in her home that was because she has cerebral palsy, that also had a very specific type of keyboard for her. And so there are many ways that you can argue to get a computer paid for, and there should not be barriers to putting that in your self-determination spending plan.
There shouldn't be, but you just never know. I mean, it is the Wild West still with self-determination.
Yeah.
So it's just very important. I hope the takeaway message here is how you articulate that particular need plays a big role in whether or not a regional center will be open to or receptive to covering that item. And you're absolutely right, Judy, that, I mean, that's definitely something that ought to be covered.
Another thing that helped with the education, and then I have a question, but I want to add something else that I thought it was really good. The child lives in a small apartment and she's hyperactive. And one thing that we got to calm her down was like those mini trampolines.
Yeah.
And that also helps with concentration, because she was like taking all these Zoom meetings and then she was like getting all these, you know, a lot of energy. So then she was able to step out and use the trampoline, calm down, like get the energy out and then come back and concentrate. So that was another thing. And we used it, we put it as behavior, like to help with her behavior, but also helps with education and like to concentrate. And my question is, like, I have a client that is actually going to Santa Monica, like college, right? And he tried to go to college before and wasn't successful, and he really wants to be an animator. And I found this really good program that is called Exceptional Minds, that is actually is animation for adults with autism and also young adults before they graduate from high school. And my question is if that would be something that would be able to be covered with the funds, because the Department of Rehab doesn't cover, they're not vendor with them. And then he's already like over the age to ask the school district to pay for it.
Yeah.
So I know Exceptional Minds really well, and actually have given their staff training on self-determination, because most regional centers will not pay their tuition.
Yeah.
So here's the issue. So I know that some people in self-determination have gotten Exceptional Minds paid for. Okay. So I would say yes. It is not a regular college program going towards a degree. It is more vocational, and Department of Rehab definitely has said no. The issue with Exceptional Minds has always been from the beginning is that it is considered a segregated program. Because the majority, if all of the people who are in the program are either a person with autism or a person who is paid to be there. And that is the definition. So, but here's the thing, the HCBS rule, final rule, which is the settings rule that we've talked about on this call before, is very specific. It is not that it doesn't prohibit you from being with a group of people with autism. Autism has nothing to do with it. It has to do with whether the people you are surrounded by in that setting are receiving services funded by the federal government through home and community-based services. And that is regional center. So the question is, are the majority of people in Exceptional Minds regional center clients? Okay. And that is not clear to me. There are a whole lot of people in Exceptional Minds who may have autism but never qualified for regional center services, or maybe are paying for it privately. So therefore, while they may be a regional center client, they're not receiving services in that setting. Mm-hmm. So I think that it is really worth speaking to Exceptional Minds to see where I think they are amazing. I highly recommend them. But I think it is worth going back and just seeing kind of where they are with the people who are there, because I've got to believe that most of them, if not all of them, are currently paying privately.
Yes, I talked to them. Yeah.
And that is the case. These are not regional center quote unquote clients in that setting. They are private paying clients who happen to have autism. And so I think you could make a case that that is compliant.
I would
Okay.
also ask, Carla.
I would say, by the way, that once self-determination goes statewide and all those people who are at Exceptional Minds become part of the self-determination program, it's going to be a problem there, because then you will have a majority of people who are using their self-determination funds there.
It's both a training program and a computer program. And I'm curious, Carla, with your particular client, if this is used in an augmentative capacity to help them succeed in their existing program at Santa Monica, or if this is to be a replacement program for your particular client. If it's an augmentation used to help them succeed, as you can identify it as a support mechanism in their success in the existing school program. And then you would be characterizing it differently than as its own program with its own set of, and then it's not exclusionary. It's an augmentative program designed to help them succeed in their other program. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how you characterize it is going to matter there too. If that is sort of their central program, then yeah, the HCBS rule is going to be very applicative. But if this program is an augmentation, it's a support to their existing school program, then it's a support that allows them to participate more fully in their existing school program.
Okay, that's great to know. He's going back to school now to start again the college route with support that he didn't have before. So we'll see if he would be able to accomplish it without the support, without the other. We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or let us know how it goes, Carla.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
So once again, if people have questions, you don't have to have questions only about education. You can also have questions about anything related to self-determination, but there's been a couple in the chat that I'm going to go back. So in Spanish, Sylvia asked that this is her first time hearing about the self-determination program, and she wants to know how to get her son in the program.
Okay. Currently the program is at the tail end of a trial.
Not a trial, it's phase-in.
Phase-in, yes.
Yeah, because we've successfully done the trial.
The trial has succeeded, but the phase-in is essentially a limited lottery-based system in which 2,500 people in the state of California were identified. And so until next June, unless something changes, you're not going to be able to enter this program. Next June, the self-determination program will exit the phase-in, and every regional center client will be eligible to participate in the program. So, so that's really great news for those of you that are not in it yet. I think this is perfect timing for folks like you to begin thinking about things like the person-centered planning process and some of the initial and get some of your get clear some of your services and supports that you have, your past POSs and a lot of your ducks in a row that way. So I encourage you to talk to someone who is knowledgeable about the program now, and you can make for yourself a very smooth transition, much smoother at least, come next June.
Great, thank you. Fernando asks, my son has autism but likes to sing. Oh, Fernando just raised his hand, so I'll let you go ahead, Fernando. You can say it verbally. Go ahead. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay. My son is actually is 21 years old, has been a client of the regional center since about 3. Graduated from high school in an SDC program. For the last 2 years, he hasn't really been doing anything other than trying to see where he fits. And one of the things that he applied for and was accepted, that includes all the recommendations and everything, was at the Musicians Institute in Hollywood. which is not only for voice training, but also some of the other things that they train them for is editing music, training musical ear, so on. You know, it's a whole variety of things. But it actually is like a college. And it's supposed to start now in October, but we're still in the process of going through this and see if the regional center will even approve part of it. My question primarily is to find out exactly to what extent is the regional center going to pay for some of this, or will the self-determination program pay for some of this?
Yeah, I think that's a
like
close
90%
call.
of that. Go ahead, Judy, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, so Fernando was just saying that his son is supposed to be starting a program in Hollywood that specifically focuses on music, but
Yeah.
also general entertainment industry stuff. And he's trying to figure out right now with the regional center if this is something that can be paid for. And honestly, I would say that's a vocational school as opposed to a school that is a clear bachelor's degree program. And so I would say it is eligible but what you would have to do is ask for the Department of Rehabilitation to pay for it first and get a rejection, which I'm certain you will. But have you started your outreach to the Department of Rehabilitation on that?
Somebody else is taking care of it, but I think so far we have tried different ways. And as a matter of fact, originally what we did is we presented the budget, but without the person-centered plan. But later on, we found out that the regional center was actually denying most of it. And I filed for an appeal, and we were told that the earliest, mind you, this was back in June, the earliest we can have an appeal will be on October 19th. So, yes, I know. So then the other thing that we did is we went back to square one. We actually started the new process of the personalized center plan, and then from there we are now in the process of establishing the actual budget that will be available for the self-determination program. But because of the number of things that I keep hearing back and forth, it leads me to believe that somewhere along the way I would still need to have the denial from the regional, I'm sorry, for the Department of Rehabilitation before we proceed with this tuition of the regional center, correct?
Yeah, that's probably true. I think you'll need to exhaust the fair hearing process. But I'm like very concerned that you filed for fair hearing in June and they said you couldn't have a hearing until October, because that's actually against the law. There's a timeline by which they are required to give you a hearing. And I'm wondering if any of the independent facilitators on this call have had a 4 or 5 month wait to have a fair hearing, because I know people who have definitely had it much more quickly. Can anybody provide a comment on that? Just unmute yourself. I don't know, Chris, have you filed for fair hearing for a client recently?
Yeah, and I mean, I've never had it taken care of in less than 30 days. I have to remind myself what the actual regulation is here. So I'm just looking that up right now, but
yeah. It's this is something that Fernando, if you want to email me, I can forward to the clients' rights advocates and at Disability Rights California, because they should really get involved if that is what the Office of Administrative Hearings is saying. I don't know, Elizabeth Gomez, are you on the call? Because I know you've been going to fair hearing for some of your clients, and I'm not sure how long it's taken you.
I can say something. This is Carla. I also been filing for fair hearing with some of my clients. And I know that by law, there is a period of time, and I believe it's like, I don't know if it's 45 days that you have to have a fair hearing or something around that. But sometimes when you ask for continuance, if you need more time, then is when it gets extended to more. But like when we filed, we were able to get it maybe 30 days, but then we were asking for continuance, so it started to get more time.
Yeah, that's what I've seen as well. Fernando or Elizabeth, can you guys, have you had to wait 4 or 5 months to get a fair hearing?
Hi, Judy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, we haven't had to wait that long. The problem is in how long it takes every time that they that if it takes it takes a lot longer if they have to continue the hearing. So what happens is that we're waiting for a long time because of how many times they have to prolong the hearing, because there's just way too many people that are testifying. So.
Yeah, so that's a different issue because sometimes you get a date from the Office of Administrative Hearings, but then your regional center says we need more time. That is that's different than what this data is being told, that they couldn't even get a date for a fair hearing until October when they filed in June. I mean, I think there's something very, very wrong with that.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can't get DRC involved, just because the Office of Administrative Hearings is breaking the law with that. They have to give you a date in 45 days.
The other fly in the ointment is that I'm away from the country right now.
Yeah.
I am in Peru. I'm stuck here. They say that maybe they will open the borders on October 1st.
Oh.
But we have been told they'll be reopening at sometime in, let's say, they said originally sometime in June, then they said July, then they said August, now they're saying October, and somewhere along the way I keep getting the feeling that in October we'll be told next year.
Yeah.
One of the things that we wanted to do is, my wife is actually in California, and we requested the hearing, and the judge who answered the phone call, believe it or not, said that they wanted to have an actual in-person hearing, and the earliest appointment was October 19th.
To me, that is crazy. Like, who's having in-person hearings right now in the time of COVID? Like, most of the hearings I know about, in fact, all of the hearings I know about are on Zoom or on the phone. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on, but if you're welcome to forward any of the emails that you've had with the Office of Administrative Hearings, because that just seems very, very wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat link, the Disability Rights California Regional Center Hearing Packet, which includes the flow chart of the timelines for your various options in this process. Give me just a second to attach that. And so, I mean, if you're familiar with Disability Rights California, they provide a lot of useful information to allow you to be an effective advocate in processes like these. So I'm trying to have it here, and then how do I share it? We can move on, but I'll go ahead and attach the link in a second here.
Perfect, thank you. All right, here's another question. We just entered self-determination, and with COVID, all of the certificates, like for dog walking and food handlers cards and animal shelter applications, are online. Can I write a goal for her to get a computer? She has enough funds, or do I need to write a change in circumstances? You definitely don't need to write a change in circumstances, because that only is necessary when there's a change in funds needed and change in your budget amount. So not necessary. You also shouldn't be having goals like, my goal is to have a computer. Like, that's not a goal. Your goals are to get a job, and to get that job, we need a computer, and that's the bottom line. So I really don't think it should have to be a completely rewritten thing.
Okay. Yeah, because everything's just there. So it's like, what are we supposed to do? Everything we look up and research all on the computer. And now we both need computers. And
yeah. And you can pay for other independent facilitators are able to get for their clients, like if you need to improve your internet or something like that, because that person is, by the way, though, if from an education standpoint, if you do not have internet, or if you have very bad internet, your freaking school district should be paying for your internet. If you're an adult who's in a day program and you don't have internet or a computer, and your day program is only providing online and not in person, your day program should be providing internet and a computer or some sort of pad for you to be able, some sort of tablet for you to be able to access that. That should not be something you have to beg for during this
School
time.
districts are providing free Wi-Fi
Yeah.
hotspots and devices as needed.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. Yeah,
It'd
for
be
sure.
unfortunate if it wasn't being provided, and maybe worth looking into. I would I'd have to look at the circumstances of the case, but you could definitely see a strong advocacy case there.
Yeah. All right, Janelle has a question. My question is about using SDP funds for special education advocacy. I should have mentioned that earlier. I'm sorry. I know the regional center will say there are generic resources available for that. OCRA service coordinators. Well, I wouldn't say that service coordinators do special education advocacy. That's pretty rare, but
Yeah.
those services are very limited. Do you have suggestions for how to best articulate a request for advocacy assistance? Okay, so you don't have to have any kind of special thing. It's actually in there. Advocacy services is one of the services in the waiver. I will get you the page, the specific thing, but I know we very much wanted to ensure that advocacy was a part of it to receive generic resources. So there shouldn't even be a question. And if you are hearing that that is been a problem for you, you need to let me know, because that was certainly not the intention, that you were supposed to be able. Okay, well, maybe it's not in there. Did it get removed? So it got removed. I'm like searching for the word advocacy in the program service definitions.
Yeah, we bill it as independent facilitation services.
Yeah, that's what you do. That's it. Thank you reminding me of that. So your independent facilitator can provide advocacy to receive generic resources. So there you go.
An independent facilitator bucket is such a loosely defined concept that you can fit most types of sort of coordination services that you might need. So I help manage staffing for individuals. I help manage. We go through the IHSS appeals and those sorts of things, and all of that falls in the IF bucket when it comes to the spending plan.
Thank you. Very helpful. Christina, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you guys. And thanks for all the information and the specifics. It's really helpful hearing examples. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure I understood a little bit more about, so continuing education, like if there was a continuing ed class at like Pierce College or LA Valley or UCLA, that would be okay to put in the SDP budget because it's not going towards a degree at that community college? Is that?
Again, it's how you articulate it, but potentially, yes. It could be something that you could cover in your SDP budget.
Okay. And then with the conversation about the exceptional minds and having like community-based under the HCBS, the CMS final rule. So if there's an inclusive program, I know, Judy, you mentioned that if people are paid, staff are paid, that then they don't consider that to be inclusive. But if it's truly community-based, like we were doing a fashion program that's out in the community and working with another community college, a club at a community college, would that be considered community-based? Even though like some of the support staff that works with some of our consumers are paid by regional center. But would that be, I'm trying to understand what programs we can access besides, that have other, obviously, people with disabilities, but that are also not educational based outside of K through 12 program.
Yeah, so the HCBS rule, is pretty clear that you can't be spending time with, the setting cannot be the majority of people are individuals who receive funding through regional centers or their paid staff. So it can't be that kind of program. you know, the question is, and we had a webinar on this. The question is whether a 1 hour or 2 hour a week program is eligible versus like a day program where you're spending hours every day. Like that to me is more clear. But if you're in a program that is just like 1 or 2 hours a week, it's possible that DDS would consider that compliant, even though they have I've heard Jim Knight, the deputy director of DDS, say that, but I've never seen it in writing. So because it's never been in writing, the regional centers are not allowing them. I can tell you my own son got rejected, funding got rejected in his spending plan for a segregated program that was all regional center clients and paid staff. And it was only 1.5 hours a week.
Yeah.
So, and yet I know Jim Knight actually said it at a conference that if it's just, you know, an hour or two a week, that's probably fine. So we're going to need DDS to provide clarification. I didn't push it, honestly. When the regional center said no to us, I didn't push it. So I'm not going to be the test case on this, but other people may need to do that.
It's going to be tricky defending a program. Defending programs is the trickiest part of this final rule. But when it comes to the individual's ability to access programs, if you can defend the fact that it's the most integrated environment for that individual, then at least on the client side, there is argument to be made for that individual to be to participate in the program. The problem is that many programs are facing this final rule scrutiny, and they have to defend that they are maximizing integration. And the question is like, integration for who? Integration for which subgroup of individuals? Some individuals might be maximally integrated into the community with your named program. Other people maybe not. So that is a challenging gray area of the final rule. But I see plenty of room if you're talking about it from the client side of accessing the program, if you can make a strong argument that they're maximally integrated into the community by participating in this kind of a program.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And if they were volunteers, let's say they're, 20 something, so they're age appropriate, or like peer mentors, but they would volunteer. So if they weren't paid staff, that would be okay because they're not paid to be there?
Well, so I think that some programs claim inclusion by having typical peers as volunteers around by them. I mean, I think that I question that inclusion methodology, because if the people with disabilities are having to pay fees to be in that program, but the people without disabilities are there without fees, I wouldn't call that a true inclusion program, because
yeah, I agree.
A program where free volunteers are coming to create inclusion. So I don't know if DDS has not issued any guidance on this. And so it is becoming really a problem for a lot of regional centers whose job it is. Service coordinator's job is to determine whether these services are in settings that are compliant. And they have received no official guidance from DDS on this. And it is very, very frustrating. One of the major barriers to participation in self-determination.
Yeah, and I just
it's going to be really.
Go ahead, Christina.
Sorry, I was just going to say, because interpretation, all this, even just without self-determination, the service coordinators interpret things so differently. So it's very important, right, to get that clarification from DDS, because that's what I've heard has been a big challenge, is not having that clarity, and one person might get it and one person might not. And so
there's a comparable sort of trend in special education in terms of mainstreaming and inclusion programming that occurs, and the incentive and the drive to try to maximally include students with disabilities into the general curriculum and to include them among their peers is very admirable. I sometimes suspect that it is hijacked by school administrators as a mechanism for eliminating costly special education programs, and then the follow-up on that inclusion element isn't really there. As in, my daughter has lots of special needs, and she would probably fit in more of a moderate severe style program. Programs like these are very challenging to find, and then the amount of supports and that you need in a general education classroom to allow someone like her to fully participate to her potential, it doesn't exist. So the problem I have is that rules like this, which are intended to maximize inclusion, do a great deal to eliminate some of the programming that might exist for individuals, but doesn't necessarily replace it with anything. And so we're facing this sort of burden and reckoning with how do we transition all of these programs out. And my hope is that regional centers and the STDD and DDS will give guidance that will allow these individuals to have a range of choices, even as the final rule is being implemented, instead of a vacuum of them. That's my concern. And again, I would say to your question, I mean, you're in a hard position to defend the program to a regional center. Someone who wants to participate in the program, you have an easier job advocating for being in a program like the one that you described.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I want to just take a moment and ask Lorna to please ask if there's any questions on the Spanish line. And while Lorna is asking that, I will advertise our webinar tomorrow, which has nothing to do with SDP Connect. It has to do with Disability Vote California. For those of you who care about the election in November, and I know Chris does, and I think all of you should, if you care about regional center funding, and if you care about funding for special education. We have formed a statewide coalition called Disability Vote California with many other organizations. And we are having a webinar tomorrow called Do You Have a Plan to Vote? And it will help you look at all the different opportunities to vote and help you create a plan for yourself and a backup plan to your backup plan. So if you are not on our mailing list to be able to receive emails about our weekly webinars, I'm going to ask Ed to post how you get on our mailing list in the chat, and or follow us on Facebook, and we also put our posts on there. Lorna, were there any questions on the Spanish line? Oh, okay. Oh, she's still listening to her question. Okay. So
hold on, I have the question. So has there been any resolution about adding COVID hours to the budget, to the SDP budget? Has any answer to that?
There is no answer. Carla, have you gotten an answer from DDS on it? Because I know, Carla, it was you that first brought this to my attention.
No, I didn't get any answers. And no.
Which hours? No. Sorry.
COVID hours. Some regional centers are calling the extra hours that individuals, families are getting, like for respite and personal assistance.
I mean, I effectively
COVID hours. Yeah. And what some regional centers are doing is not including those hours in the person's individual budget, even though in the traditional system, they're part of their list of services. We have been begging for a couple of months now for DDS to make a determination on this. I would really recommend to everyone, because it is important to start the self-determination program as soon as possible. Don't let the fact that you're not getting COVID hours in your budget be the reason you're not entering. You can enter the self-determination program and start the process of fair hearing around those extra hours.
Yeah.
And then, so at least the clock is ticking on due process. And then I've got to believe that a hearing, an administrative law judge is going to say that people in self-determination need to be treated equally to people in the traditional system.
I pretty regularly in this time, I have, let's see, currently have about 15 clients that I'm working with actively. And I want to say 5 of them, we've effectively increased their hours. The conversations I attend 6 or 7 local advisory council committees in the Bay Area and Sacramento. And, you know, the conversation about this often revolves around the fact that every individual is affected differently by the COVID crisis. And so DDS has been reluctant to issue sort of a general sort of advisory on what to do on that, but that the regional centers that I've worked with at least have been very receptive to understanding how current circumstances have changed and affected any individual in terms of their hours. The problem is this doesn't provide sort of a blanket solution for everyone to receive an increase in hours. But if you're educated and you're able to discuss how and in which ways the COVID crisis has affected the strenuousness of caring for someone in your home with a disability, you certainly have plenty of room to argue for an increase in respite hours, for example, or increased SLS hours or ILS hours if you use those. So these are things that my group's really been pretty successful with. It's not been a huge challenge to ask for them, but I understand that it would be easier, and I kind of wish too that everyone could just sort of receive the blanket of additional hours, like a 20% bump or 30% bump or whatever.
Yeah,
I personally would love that.
I think in my experience, it depends on the regional center, and one in particular is not giving COVID hours at all, not even outside self-determination. So if a client only has a low amount of hours in respite, and then that's the only thing that they have, and they don't have those COVID hours and need to work from home, I need that assistance to be able to work and take care of the child, then that's the problem in transitioning to self-determination. Yeah. And that's one particular regional center. There are others that they're still giving the COVID hours, but outside the budget in the traditional system. So you get like 2 things, like one is the budget and the other one is
I think, so using language, the language that you could use, Carla, respite is designed to provide individuals the opportunity to live safely in their home by making sure that their caregivers are given adequate respite. So I mean, the language you'd use worker or a case manager might be something more like the increased strain of having this person at home this many extra hours presents me with a situation where I feel like this person is less safe, this person is less able to where I feel like I'm not as sure as I once was that they're going to be able to remain in their home all the time the way that I would like them to. And so what I need is additional respite so that I can, so that I can continue to care for this person and allow them to live safely in the home. So using health and safety language as much as possible may be effective. You always have tough nuts to crack. I understand that.
Yes, this particular regional center is very tough. We tried that strategy and they only gave like maybe 5 extra respite hours for the month. Okay. But then if you stay in outside self-determination, you get 20 hours per week.
Okay, so well, if you want to, well, I mean, if your client wanted to talk about it more, I'd be happy to offer some guidance on what's been successful with me in a number of different regional centers, but I'm not going to promise that I'm the end all be all. I have been successful thus far, but it's just a matter of.
It seems to be more in the Southern California regional centers that this is. So I don't know if you've been successful down here yet. If you
Orange County, I do pretty well with, but but LA is new for me, and I understand LA is its own giant beast, and I'm still getting to know LA.
7 regional centers.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I have heard pretty consistently in the LA area that regional centers are using the COVID hours and COVID generally to dissuade people from moving into self-determination.
Hmm.
And to say, you know, if you stayed in the traditional system, you're going to get all this, but you're going to lose it if you go into self-determination. That to me is one of the many barriers that we have to get past. So here's the general advice that I give to everybody. Everybody should be filing for due process. Go into the self-determination program right now because we need the numbers. We don't want them to take away self-determination from us because nobody's going in. And right now the numbers are really low. So start the self-determination program and file for due process, or file for it now and then get the ball rolling. And whatever budget you have, your budget can always be increased. Just like you can sign your IPP and get the services that are offered in the traditional system and still file for fair hearing to get additional services. Same thing with the IEPs. You can do the same thing in school. You can agree to part of your IEP and go to fair hearing for other parts of it. So I really, really urge people. I know a lot of people are staying out of the self-determination program because everything hasn't been absolutely agreed upon. That's just go, get in, get started, and file for fair hearing. I want, if we have 100 fair hearing cases at the beginning of the self-determination program, it will be very clear to me what is going on. And we need to know that. I mean, don't file for fair hearing for no reason. I mean, you should have a legitimate reason. Let me be clear. And some people can over ask. I mean, you're not going to get the moon, the stars, and the sun in self-determination. It is not going to cure all of the ills of the traditional system. However, you should, there are services that people like you are receiving in the traditional system, and that you should be receiving them regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of who you are. Okay?
And I'll add to that I think that we're all aware of, whether we're parents or participants or advocates in the regional center system, that the whole reason that self-determination exists is because we are suffering under a history of insufficient implementation of the Lanterman Act. Mm-hmm. And across the board, the most common thing I come across is the inconsistency of the application of certain services and supports with very similar cases. So like I've served enough clients now where I see person A and person B, and they ought to be receiving the same, roughly the same services, and they're not, just because of the experience level of the caseworker and the case manager, the different regional center that's involved. And so the way that I've articulated this at different local advisory committees is that I believe that there is an institutional depressive force on the provision of services. And so a lot of case managers and caseworkers will ask me why every single client I bring to them has, we're asking for such a higher budget than what they had before self-determination. And it's true, most of the clients that I serve, when entering the budget certification process, their budgets end up being much, much higher than the services they received prior to entering self-determination. And the reason that I advocate for that is because I think that we all need to serve as a corrective force on this problem. And we need to counterbalance that depressive institutional force on services and equalize that a little bit. And I know that at the state level, they're saying that self-determination is going to save money in the long term. And I believe it if they say it. I can say that in the short term, there needs to be a bit of a reckoning. And that's part of what I do with my clients is, I'm sorry, but we have provided an inappropriately diverse range of services to different people. And we need to equalize that a little bit. And so in the short term, you're going to see increased budgets, at least coming from my organization. And I defend that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, it's going to need to be defended, by the way. We are hearing that most people's budgets are higher than their last 12 months.
Yeah.
And so that is going to absolutely need to be defended at the end of we will all have a reckoning of this program, let me tell you. So we have to end in 3 minutes because we will lose our Spanish interpreter. But I just want to say one more word about fair hearing. We in the field of parent advocacy often call that process the unfair hearing as opposed to the fair hearing. So when I recommend that people file for fair hearing, I am not in any way saying that you are going to succeed. I am not predicting that the Office of Administrative Hearing, those judges even know a damn thing about the self-determination program. And that some of you will not come out successful from it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't fight for your rights. Who can represent you at a fair hearing? Your independent facilitator can represent you. And you may make a decision that, let's say you have a budget of only like $3,000 or $4,000, you have a tiny little budget. You may decide that you want to spend 1,000 of that on your independent facilitator helping you. Who can be your independent facilitator? It can be a lawyer. That's not going to buy you a lot of time of a lawyer, $1,000, or it can be a person who has experience in advocacy before an administrative law judge and understands the Lanterman Act. So that may be the decision you make, is that you want to put your budget toward advocacy because your budget is so low that it doesn't even make sense to move forward in self-determination unless you can increase it. And having somebody can help you make that case. I know that we are monitoring this at Disability Voices United. We're monitoring people's fair hearings in the self-determination program. I have yet to hear of one that has gone through to its end result yet. If that has happened and an administrative law judge has ruled on one, I would be very interested in seeing the ruling on that case, whether it was in your favor or not in your favor. I want to see how these administrative law judges are talking about it, because the last time I heard somebody go to fair hearing, the very first one that I heard of a year ago, the law judge said, "What is this self-determination thing? Is that like in your fantasy world or is that real?" So I know that these judges have never been trained on the self-determination program, even though I've tried to provide that training from DVU. So I am very interested. Is there anybody here? You can use the hand raise feature or just like wave at me or just shout out. Has anybody had a fair hearing that has gone through to the end with a result, with a ruling by the administrative law judge?
I've only heard of one story of it. And it wasn't any of my clients, no.
So,
Do you know someone that asked for more services before getting into self-determination to increase their budget, and then went to fair hearing and was not successful? So she's now considering like what to do. So that's my experience that I have. So you're suggesting that people get into self-determination and file for fair hearing, or when you're asking for more services in the traditional system, then many times they want to wait into moving into self-determination.
Right. Well, they shouldn't wait. Now is the time. You need that flexibility. Jan, we have only a minute left? Go ahead, Jan.
I had a judge years ago, wasn't for self-determination, and he said, "This is ridiculous. You shouldn't even have to be here. The law says you should be able to choose what services your child gets." So I went, amen. No. So there are a few judges out there. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was by myself against the regional center. So, but there are a few out there. Hopefully he's still around. Yeah. But I was like shocked. We won, but
Well, I want to really thank Chris Wecks for an amazing presentation. I actually learned something as well. I don't consider myself a special ed expert since my son's been out of school for many years. But again, everybody's invited to our webinar at 1 o'clock tomorrow on creating a voting plan. Really appreciate you all joining us this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week with SDP Connect. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.